American Black elected officials work very hard. And some of them hardly work. Let's be clear about that too. And so we took a survey as a part of Still Invisible, Examining America's Black Male Crisis, which for those of you all who are interested, the book is available on Amazon and everywhere books are sold. Feel free to get your copy. But we took a survey of 400 Americans, and it was a survey that we like to say, Dr. Bullock, looked like America. And so 50% were men, 50% were women, about 60% was white. There was about 18% Hispanic, 12% African-American, so on and so forth. And we asked in your chapter that is entitled Hope or Nope and talks about the value of Black political participation. We asked folk, can you give us, and it was the only part of our poll that was an open-ended question, because we wanted to see what words would you use to describe Black elected officials. And the most commonly used words were either effective, because a lot of people think that Black elected officials are effective when it comes to moving the ball forward for Black people. But another commonly used word was talkers. And so I'm reminded of my distant cousin, James Brown, who talked about this idea of talking loud and saying nothing. And so we also asked, what are some of the most positively what are some of the more positive attributes? And they used the word good. And we asked them negative attributes. Interestingly enough, they used the word racist to describe Black elected officials. Now, I told you that this was a poll that looked like America, right? So 60% was white, 18% was Hispanic, but there were quite a few people who used the word racist to describe Black elected officials. I'm going to toss that first to Roy, because Roy is in sort of that NAACP field, but I'm interested after Roy shares his perspective, Dr. Bullock, what you think about what they say about y'all.
Well, once again, unfortunately, many in our community are behind in being involved in local level politics. So therefore, at the local level, you have the key players in local politics are your power company, your developers, and your let's say maybe a traditional lobbyist, your lobbying agency, who are lawyers, all around. But my point is that the lobbyists are talking to the elected officials, but they're not hearing from the community on a regular basis unless there's a crisis, unless there's a police shooting, unless there's a scandal of some sort. Those are the things that bring the people out. But we're not packing the house when we're talking about raising the water bill 25 cents, or raising taxes 2%, or building some large business or structure. We're not in those conversations. And so unfortunately, the established lobbying body, they've got an amazing head start with relationships, with resources, and a tremendous amount of influence. And this is why we're just now seeing the change around policing, because the interest in the change around policing, because so many people now have turned up, hit the streets all over the country at the same time, and they're maintaining their engagement. So all politicians are taking, now I'm gonna go all politicians. I know you wanted me to talk about the Black politicians, but I'm gonna go with all politicians right now. But all of the politicians are paying attention because there's such a massive level of engagement at the local level, mainly focused around policing. It's spilling into some other things, but it's mainly focused around policing. And this is one of the first times that we're ever seeing movement around policing. Why? Because the police unions have had such a stronghold in the community and around our local officials up until 2 or 3 weeks ago. So I'm gonna leave it right there.
Brother Roy Tatum, you hit on so many fronts. So I will say this, right? So one experience I had doing research, but also doing community activism, was being involved with community organizing. and there's a mantra in it, and it fits both organizing as well as to politics and anything else. Organize people and organize money, right? And so you mentioned the people who you mentioned in terms of lobbyists and companies and developers and people who contribute to campaigns and people whose voices are heard, right? So that's one way to do it. But if you don't have a lot of money, you better have a lot of people. And so what you're seeing now is that people are hitting the streets. They may not have deep pockets, but their voices are being heard. And so turning up not only the vote is part of it, but also as we protest and turn that protest into politics. So for instance, I've had experiences in our district where we had, people who were active. A lot of them were seniors and homeowners, and there was something that happened in their community and they were up in arms about it, and they came to my office and we're working together. But a lot of times folks who are living check to check or no check at all or are struggling, they don't have the luxury oftentimes to be thinking about, the political process, and they're not as engaged and they're not as regular voters, and people don't always hear from them as often. So you're absolutely right about that. And then oftentimes it really is around crises that we hear from folks. But you make a good point in terms of how folks get their voices heard, right? And so it has to be this collective action. And I was looking at even some of the bullet points that you put up, Brother Elvin, down before around how do we then make something actionable, right? And so oftentimes you mentioned the lobbyists, they come to you with, this is what we're looking for. And so a lot of times the challenge is, okay, come with a bunch of problems. Okay, what's the issue? How do we turn that issue into something that's actionable, right? Because we have a whole laundry list of things that we can get done. You mentioned, budgeting. You think about some of the practices. Those are some of the target points you have to hit if you're trying to get action, on those issues. Absolutely.